about to begin a second part of the Tractate Yevamot. Is a seventh chapter, and we are now taking a little turn in this chapter, and we're dealing with Dinei Trumot, many halachot in regards to Truma, meaning a special contribution. As we all know, the Kohanim, the priests, they have special privileges. They have a lot of obligations. Their status is not only exceptionally different, but also, one who connected to them, either by marriage or by inheritance, carries certain privileges. Some examples, let's say eating truma, a contribution that was sanctified for the temple. They are the one who can do it. That applies also to the daughter of Kohen, as long as she's not married out of the kehuna, of the priesthood, meaning someone who's not Kohen, she can eat from that truma. Also, in case she married someone and she lost her husband, she goes back to the parents' house and she can eat the truma. There is a concept of or nuances in a case of divorce or in a case of married to a Kohen. So that's part of our discussion. We're going also to learn the definition again. We studied it not long ago. The difference in the acquiring properties and inheritance when it's come to the entity of fixed property versus property that has some type of liquids like milog. In very short, we're going to elaborate on that later, but it's important for us to know that just the concept. One is if a woman marry a man and she bring with her valuables, we differentiate at the time of writing the contract, the ketubah contract between the two, to two different entities of those valuables. One is a fixed property. Fixed property, for example, can be a iron sheep, for example, valuable that she put in a ketubah as something that it's unchangeable. If she brings something that it's precious to her and carries value, the husband allowed during the period of marriage to enjoy the fruit of that produce, but his contract is in a marriage contract obligated to have the same value at the time of separation, either by divorce or passing of the spouse. Meaning she carried the original values, regardless if it's getting higher or not, she carries that value no matter what. His right over those properties only applies to a produce that's coming out of those values, and obviously that's the meaning of nichsei tzon barzel. It's like iron, it's not changed. Another entity, it's called nichsei milog. Nichsei milog meaning it is something that she brings that can be changed. Something, that, properties or other things that can bring produce and be in a constant ups and down, change, lost, gain, etc. For example, soon you see, especially in those days, it was servants, it was others. The question is, what happened if it's involved with the two entities? One, if she come from a house of Kohen, that they have special privileges, or she entered the house of Kohen. So here we are on page 66, beginning of the Mishnah. Almana lechohen gadol, grusha וחליצה lechohen ediot. We explained by the Torah law from the book of Leviticus, chapter 21, verse 14. The Torah tells us that there are certain restrictions when it's come to priests. Kohanim, they can marry a divorcee, but they're allowed to marry widows. High priest, Kohen Gadol, cannot even marry widows. if that marriage took place, then the children or she herself turned to be halala, which means those privileges are lost. So they said, Almana lekohen gadol, a widow that married to a high priest, which is in violation, grusha וחליצה lekohen ediot, again, that make her halala, and therefore she cannot eat truma. הכניסה לו עבדי מילוג ועבדי צאן ברזל. Here we talk about the two entities. She brings to that marriage the two. One, she bringing a servant that they are milog, meaning that it can change, and she have also tzon barzel. So milog, they can eat the fruits, but when it's a ketubah, when it's a marriage agreement, it's written that in a case of divorce or death, so nichsei tzon barzel, as we said, no matter what happened, there is a full payment regardless. So when it's come to those servants, then they cannot eat the truma. So Tosfot tells us, afilu leman da'amar, even to the one who tells us in Tractate Gittin, page 47, kinyan peirot, they have acquirement of produce, meaning she brought a produce, for example, a orchard, a field, all right, or oranges. It doesn't help. Why? Ke kinyan haguf dami. It's like, in a sense, acquiring the property itself. So if you talk in mitzad habal, from the side of the husband, he eats only the produce, as we said. But if from the her side, from the wife's side, she is halala, and therefore she cannot eat it, and therefore she cannot feed others, her servant. So if it's avdei nichsei tzon barzel, if this is the servant of nichsei tzon barzel, so they considering as avadav, meaning they are like the servant at this point of the husband, and therefore they can eat this from his part. Avdei tzon barzel yochlu. In other words, avdei milog lo yochlu betruma, avdei tzon barzel yochlu. Now the Mishnah elaborates on that and said, ve'elu hen avdei milog, and these are the rules which define those servants of milog. Remember, it's two entities. Milog is the, how do you call it in the modern days, acids versus liquid cash, right? Or right. I'm right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So imetu metula, meaning the lost. If they passed, it's on her. Meaning, if she lost her husband or she get divorced after those servants passed, the husband did not need to compensate her for the loss of those servants. Again, let's understand the concept. She brought to the marriage those servants, okay? Those servants eat her, but since they are under the category of milog, if something happened and those passed, she cannot gain the value of those people. Ve'im otiru otiru la, which means if they gain or lost its values, remember at that time they evaluate, so that belongs to her. Meaning, if she became widow or divorced after those servants changed their status, she take it as is, meaning, again, she does not need to compensate, for example, her ex for that difference. So if those servants worth in the modern days 200,000 and when the time of the marriage was 100,000, she does not need to compensate her ex over the difference in the values. Next, they said, if it's married with the widow to high priest, aval pi shehu chayav bimzonotav, even the husband is obligated to feed those servants, but they're not eat the kohen truma, Next step, ואלו הם עבדי נכסון ברזל. אם מתו לו, which means that he is obligated since it's barzel, so he needs to pay the difference to her. ואם הותירו לו, since it's a total ownership, so any gain, it belongs to him. He doesn't need to go the difference, to pay the difference between the time of the marriage to that moment. הואיל והוא חייב באחריותן, since he take the loss in case they turn a loss, like a typical business, right? So it's considering a total requirement of his, and therefore if a widow marry a high priest, הרי אלו יאכלו בתרומה. So you may ask, but wait a second, even that marriage is prohibited, the marriage between Almana and Kohen Gadol, and she is halala, and she is prohibited for truma. But since, as we learn in page 49, bedi'avad, after the fact, that type of marriage is effective, so therefore, the same as a regular manner of marriage, he acquire all the valuable, meaning all the nichsei tzon barzel, and if he is a Kohen, he has those rights over that. And the Tosfot tells us at the very end, he said that אף על פי שאין לרב פירות אלא הגוף, ואפילו למאן דאמר כי אין פירות כי אין הגוף דמי עטיה. Now, the Mishnah brings us the foundation of that concept. They said Bat Yisrael. Bat Yisrael meaning someone is the daughter of anyone who's not Kohen. Can be even a daughter of Levi. So that's considering a foreign, an alien. It's not one who permitted. And Torah tells us in Vayikra, in Leviticus 22, V'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. Someone who's not Kohen, who's alien, cannot eat a sanctified food. So if the daughter of Israel sheniset lekohen, she marry a Kohen, meaning she doesn't have zchuyot mitzad atzma, she doesn't have the right independently, it's only because she married her Kohen, ve'echnisa lo avadim, while the transaction of the marriage, she brought servants, bein avdei milog, bein avdei tzon barzel, הרי אלו יאכלו בתרומה. So regardless what exactly the category of those servants, because tzon barzel, it's part of their husband's property. So they said, the moment she became Kinyana Kohen, meaning she's part, quote-unquote, of his acquisition, so therefore, Rashi tells us, Kinyano shekana kinyan, mishat hanisuim, the moment that's married, and Rashi said, afilu avdei milog shenan shelo yochlu, דהיינו קניינו שקנה קניין, ולפי בגמרא דהיינו שקנה קניין אוכל. So therefore her servants, milog, they can eat. She can, יכולה להאכיל. ובת כהן שנישאת לישראל, the other way around, if you have a daughter of Kohen who marries an ordinary Israel, so now is a rשות חדשה, it's Israel, right? והכניסה לו עבדים, בין עבדי מילוג, בין עבדי צאן ברזל, הרי אלו לא יאכלו בתרומה. Remember, the moment she's out, she's married to Israel, so since Avadim, the servant of נכסי צאן ברזל, it's part of the acquirement of the husband, so therefore he is Israel, and they cannot eat from the truma like the same all the other who are not. Even though it's considering part of her ownership, and she came from the house of Kohen, but that's in a way the question is if that perpetuated to her servants. So the Gemara said, "Ve'avdei milog lo yochlu b'truma." Wait a second, these servants are her, it's not he. So we said kinyano shekana kinyan. So he is also it betruma amai leheve kinyano שקנה קניין. Let this case of the widow slaves be viewed as a Kohen acquisition that purchased other property, and the halacha is that such property is entitled to eat truma מדין הבעלים, can eat. דתניא, מניין לכהן שנשא אישה וקנה עבדים שיאכלו בתרומה? How do you know that the Kohen married a regular Bat Israel and acquired Canaanite slave, that the wife and the servant can eat ben truma, שנאמר, they said Leviticus 22, וכהן כי יקנה נפש קניין כספו הוא יאכל בו. So meaning that applied to his servant, his wife, and whoever he acquires. ומניין לאישה שקנתה עבדים ועבדיו שקנו עבדים שיאכלו בתרומה, שנאמר וכהן כי יקנה נפש קניין כספו יאכל בו. קניינו שקנה קניין אוכל. So here, what do you see? The question is, why avdei milog of the wife of Kohen, that is now she is disqualified, but they still allowed to eat the truma? It's part of the Kinyan Kohen. Rashi tells us there is a concept that we said, Mashe kana eved, whatever a slave, a servant acquires, it's not his. It belongs to his master. That's important part of this puzzle. So sometimes it may turn a case that, let's say Mr. A come in, let's call him name, Reuven come in, and he gives the servant of someone else, of Shimon, he gives Shimon's servant a expensive gift. And he said, that's only for you, no one else can use it. So even it may happen that the master has no access or no right, but according to Rashi, in a way, it's not belong to the boss, but the big question is, Tosfot challenged that, and Tosfot said, even in that case, the servant has no right to have acquisition. Why? Because by its nature, it's total servant. Traces an error in ancient time. Someone stole a lot of money, right? They caught him. Ancient time, it wasn't like nowadays, the stupid jail, giving three hot meals a day and have fun watching TV all day and playing, games. In those days, what happened is, if you cannot pay back what you stole, they make you a slave, a servant. You work for someone, and that money, excluding food that you have, the rest go to a place that you stole from. Right? So basically, you are not yourself in a sense. You are servant of a master. And therefore, any acquisition, if you buy a lottery ticket and you won $1 million, is not yours. It belongs to a master. Okay? So Tosfot said, he challenged Rashi views over this acceptance of gifts, right? So Tosfot said, it may happen, according to what we study in Tractate Kritut, that someone mafkir avdo, someone allowed to release his servant. So the moment he's making worthless, he gave away his servant. He doesn't have zchuyot mammoniyot. He doesn't have the monetary right over that. However, when it's come to truma, he can eat. Why? Because when it's come to truma, it's not total shichur. It's not total manner of release. Here is an example. Kinyano shekana kinyan, avdo ochel betruma. So, after it's all said and done with this Rashi in Tosfot, Aruch Laner come in and he asks a question. You tell me that halala is not eating from teruma. Why? Because she's halala, the marriage was basically effective but was in violation. So therefore, en ladin kohenet, she doesn't carry the same manner as the one of the kohen's rights. So the same as zara. the same as a foreigner, right? So if she's eating from that the same pasuk, which is vekohen ki yikne kinyan kaspo, the same way as a eved, as a servant, cannot do it the same as level of kedusha. Why, when it's come to isha, she is halala? May she considering kinyan kaspo, part of the kinyanim. So the stipler, the Kilot Yaakov, explains that she have a psul mechamat atzma, which means the stipler has explained that there are two entities in a book called Kilot Yaakov. One, it's called zara, meaning someone who is alien, foreign, and the second one is yesh la psul, she has some disqualification. So when it's come to kohen, when it's he have a psul avdo, so he eats the same as arel, and it's tameh, he pasul. So the servant of the kohen can eat the same here halala. It's not only psul, but zara. And when it's come to zara, she cannot le'achil et ha'avadim, she cannot feed the servants. But I just give you the vignette of the Kilot Yaakov. So it's the same as, in a sense, eved ochel me'eved, the servants take from another servant. So the Gemara said, kol ha'ochel ma'achil, whoever allowed by himself to eat truma, he can give to others. Kol she'eno ochel eno ma'achil. So Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman explained here, and he said, if you look at this pasuk, it's not svara. It's not just by itself. It's the idea is that it's your requirement. It's like yourself. It's part of yourself. The moment you acquire it, it's you. So the Gemara said, "Velo, is that correct? That a person, even he himself, cannot eat truma. He can have others. Ve'arei arel ve'kol atmeim." Meaning, if you have kohen that didn't have a brit milah, or any other kohen that have any type of ritual impurity, she'enan ochlin, that they are prohibited from eating truma, uma'achilin, but the wives, the servants, can eat from truma. So the Gemara rejected that and said, "Ha tam pumayu kaivlu." So I explained my book. Rashi said here, "Klumar mechusrei takantaim, aval omdim litaken veleechol." So basically, I think the Rashi have an issue here with something we studied in page 104b. So what does that mean? Pumayu hu dechaivlu. It's not by the mouth. It has to be the matter of expression. Meaning now they cannot do it, but later they are befitting to eat. But again, much more here. Rashi said, at this very moment, it's like arel or tameh. So the gavra it's not mufka, betruma. It's only matzav zmani, it's a temporary situation. So it can change, the same as peh, right? But you have some pain, but it can change. Versus psul halala, that's something permanent. And therefore, if she's not eating, she cannot feed other. The mitzpeh tan challenged that. But mitzpeh tan said, on the name of the Ritva, he brought the Ritva, that said that you have to differentiate between something is permanent and something not. He says, if the blood became part of him, so basically yishtane, he changed the status, and then you can go ahead and do the brit. Anyway, ve'harei mamzer, she'ein ochel ve'ma'achil, if the Kohen passed, and he left a continuation, so basically the question is how far you go with the zchuyot. Rashi said, Bat Yisrael sheniset lekohen, you have a regular daughter of Israel that married a Kohen. Ve'yalda bat, they have together a daughter. Ve'abat niset lemamzer, that daughter married illegitimate man, וילדה אשת כהן האוכלת בשבילו תרומה לאחר מיתת בעלה, לפי שיש לה זרע מן הכהן. So they said, והוא הדין נמי, כשר היה אבא שנולד מישראל כשר, נמי אין אוכל ומאכיל את אם אמו, ועד נקן לו ופתאום ממזל משום דמנדיתן היא. Anyway, אמר רבינה, קניין אוכל כאמר. It's not in all different דיני תרומה, but קניינו שקנוי קניין. So therefore, אוכל ומאכיל. קניין אוכל ומאכיל, שאינו אוכל אינו מאכיל. ואמר, מדאורייתא מיכל אכלי, but by the Torah law, those servant, milog servant, of the wife of the Kohen, that turned to be psula, they can eat from the truma. רבנן ודגז רבו, כדי שתאמר, אני אוכלת, אינן אוכלים, זונה אצלו ילקח עד אליה פוקר. Wow, he showed you how smart the rabbi is. Listen to this. Biblically speaking, mid'oraita, so the slaves can eat from the truma, right? The only story here is you have Gzeirah de Rabbanan, you have a rabbinic decree. Since we know that Almana is prohibited to Kohen Gadol, and Grusha and Chalutza prohibited to Kohen Idiot, so here who enters the picture, the Bet Din, the rabbis, and they do something to create an atmosphere in a house that she wants to break the relationship between her and her husband. How you do that? So you create an atmosphere by saying, okay, you consider yourself a couple, you're a couple. In effect, you're a couple, right? Mm-hmm. But here's the story. She cannot eat from the truma. So what happened? After some period of time, she started thinking, wait a second, he's not treated me as a normal husband-wife relationships. He treated me differently, right? So why bother to live in such a life of marriage? I better breaking up with him, right? So she cannot eating because she's halala. And you think about her servants, that they cannot eat. Why they cannot eat? Because it's your servant. Let's understand. Mm-hmm. She came to the picture, she's in violation. She brought her servants. She figured out she cannot eat, but the servant can eat. But then she heard that the servant cannot eat because she cannot eat. So now she feels, I'm not really part of his life. I'm here like a second class. And that creates an atmosphere that she feels, the term here they use to call it in text, zonahi etzlo, which means I don't feel like I'm a legitimate wife with him, and then gorem leperud miyuchal. Therefore, it's create a situation, you call it in Ivrit, elbon, meaning insult. She feels an insult, and as a result, hopefully, they will break up. The Kohen they get divorced. Rav Ashi Amar, smart rabbis, no? Rav Ashi Amar.
Oh, meddlesome.
Look.
No, I know, I understand.
They understand that they cannot directly break up that relationship, even it's in violation of Torah laws.
Right, so they...
Anyway,
well, no, just in other cases they say they force him to divorce her. So
they
why
don't force, they create an atmosphere
no,
of unhappiness.
but in other cases they say that we force him to divorce. There are cases that
they force.
So why in this case wouldn't they just force him to divorce?
It seems like
because think about it. How do you say it? They love each other, right? They are together. It's all. Don't you know stories?
Yeah,
like
so
that?
they love each other so much. That's why they went and violated law.
I knew a guy here, no name, in New York, was a Kohen, right? And he was 25 years with divorced woman, best friends. They met at his, who knows, late 50s, early 60s, and they are best friends. And he's a frum guy. And he was dying to marry her, And his son, who lived in Monsey, said, I'll totally disconnected with you if you married her. So they live, unfortunately, in this type of situation for like, who knows, 25, until he passed. Anyway, Rav Ashi אמר גזירה שמתה אחי לאחר מיתה. Right? So that specifically applies to Avdei Milog. Because as long as the husband is alive, they are part of his kinyanat. And then after his pass, that's the issue. אלא מעתה בת ישראל שנישאת לכהן אותה אחי גזירה שמתה אחי לאחר מיתה. So the same is applied to any isha, that she can feed at the time of her husband. The reality is, by halacha, it's not so simple, because in case, and we know cases like that, when I was a rabbi in New Jersey, I have a heavy case like that. The husband was MD, PhD. He graduated from MIT, etc., etc., and she was not working. And her house was like a hotel. Everybody used to come, tzedakah organization. So one time she was angry at me. I said to her, you know, I noticed that your husband is not so religious, is not so care for all of that. And I noticed even is he home, you don't give him the full attention that he should get. And I said, and talking a little bit with him, he is not in favor of what you're doing. So you're doing a lot of chesed, a lot of tzedakah with his money, in a way. So even you guys are partners, but if you don't have his consent, he's not considering tzedakah by its mean, because in a way it's his money. Yes, you are partner of his life, but she was so mad at me. Anyway, what can I tell you? I'm Israeli. I can tell people things that what I feel. I'm not two faces. Anyway, Ela Amar Rav Ashi b'almana kohenet. Talk about almana, that she's kohenet. De'atya lo ruye. Me'ikar ha'ach lebitruма de'veinasha. In sevidilai ha'ach lebitruma de'gavrai. Ve'ashta al re'lemiteka. So I'm like the original widow. So, because before she married the Kohen Gadol, she was all the servant go by her father. So she figured out, now my status changed. ולא ידע למעיקר לא שביתי נפשה חללה, עד ששביתי נפשה חללה. So, Rashi said that Almana Kohelet, he explained it beautifully. He says, guess what? She thinking, originally I'm daughter of Kohen. And then, husband. But her husband, because of my situation, I'm halala, I cannot eat. So she figured out that's not affected my servants. My slaves, my servants is not affected. Then, after it's gone, the relationship is over, she goes back to her father's house. So, she think, maybe my servants are different status. But Rashi said here clearly, לאכילם בתרומה מחמת אביה דאמרה מעיקר באלמנותי הראשון הוא יעבדה אוכלים בתרומה דבינשה. אין סבילי לכהן גדול דאח לעבדי בתרומה דגבריה אשתא כשמת אדרי למילקא דקמייתא ולכודה בתרומה דבינשה כמעיקר באלמנותי הראשון. That's what she's thinking. So Gemarrah said, תנח המנה כהנת, המנה בת ישראל מה יקרא למימר? So he said, באלמנותה לו פליגי רבנה. Can be very painful. So you see here the three different avenues between the three, because here you have the Milog's slaves. So you go by three different avenues. You have the Ravina. Ravina said that it applies solely limited to Kohanim and acquisitions who themselves eat Truma, but it's exclude the widow who married the Kohen Gadol who may not eat Truma herself. And then we have Rava. Rava said that the whole idea of the sage's decree to suspend all that rule in the hope that the resulting friction will induce the Kohen Gadol to divorce his illegal wife. Or you go by Rav Ashi, who said that the sage's decree to suspend, it's because the less certain widows mistakenly continue to feed their slaves truma after the death of the Kohen Gadol, and again, it's because she misconstrued the concept. So now we go to a total different subject, which is the right of the husband over נכסי צאן ברזל. Itmar. המכנסת שום לבעלה. שום לבעלה, as we explained earlier, they have a, how do you call it in the modern days, appraisal. Mm-hmm. She brings a lot of things sometimes, and you put the list in ketubah. Mm-hmm. So it's not milog. Milog, remember that the husband can eat the produce. Here, the problem is when things break up, can be even with a good understanding, not necessarily horrific divorce, right? The issue is, can you give her money or you have to give her the exact item? Because sometimes it's a sentimental item for her, right? She feels very close to that, whatever it is, entity. So he אומרת, כלי אני נוטלת. She said, I wish to take my vessels. It's originally mine, right? והוא אומר, דמים אני נותן. He said, wait a second, when we write the contract, we go by the appraisal, and at that time, it's appraised by X amount of money. So guess what? I'll give you the full appraisal, even that it's higher than evaluation, but I'm not giving you the item. I give you just the value, because I'm responsible that if it lost its value, I still give you the evaluation of the original items. So in other words, if that item, let's say it's an expensive cloth that she feels very emotional to that cloth, and it's valued for $1,000, and now it's a $500, he needs to give her $1,000. If it's now $2,000, he needs to give her $2,000. So he said, wait a second, I'm responsible regardless to the circumstance by the monetary value of that item. I'm giving you money, I'm not giving you the item, right? And she said, no, I am attached to that sentimental part, I want that. So Hadinimi, with whom we go, right? Rav Yehuda said, 56b, Hadinima. So he said that the halacha is according to her, and she may demand the return to her original property. ורב עמי אמר, Hadinimo, wait a second, why? מה פתאום? How come? The original agreement was a value, and if it was lost from $1,000 to $100, he still need to give her the $900. And regardless of the circumstance, he give cash, so how come? Rav Yehuda אמר Hadinima, משום שבח בית אביה לדאבה. Because in honor of the original house that she came from, so you should go and give her. רבי עמא אמר Hadinimo, כיוון דאמר אם מתו לו, ואם הותירו לו, הואיל וחייב באחריותן, יאכל לו, as we said. So, since he's responsible, regardless. So it's a big discussion among the Rishonim. What exactly happened, נהיה שלה אחרי הגוביינה. Because as we said, she's sometimes very attached. She's a sentimental feeling to her pictures, right? Clothing, certain emotional stories attached to certain gifts, etc. Right? אמר רב ספרא, מי קטן אבן שלו, הואיל וחייב באחריותן קטנה. הוא לא לעבדידנו. So the Gemara tried to reject that notion. וכל אחד חייב באחריותן אך לבתרומה. ואתנן, this is Mishnah in Tractate Yevamot, page 11, chapter 11. They said, ישראל ששכר פרה מכהן, and here, הרי זה יאכילנה קרשיני תרומה. So he may feed the cow vetch of truma, since the animal remains the property of the Kohen. So let's understand the issue here. We have two avenues in this issue. One is Choshen Mishpat and one is Yoredea. The Choshen Mishpat issue here is the truma is part of the kehuna, right? And therefore, it's not for his personal needs. So the moment he leases a cow from a Kohen, so he needs to take care of everything from himself because it's sanctified. The Yoredea said that since he's a kadosh, the question is, מאכילים לתרומה או קנייני כהונה? Because that cow itself is קנייני תרומה. So you have no issue of feeding. Take for example in Israel there is a big safari zoo close to Ramat Gan. Belongs to a frum Jew. His name is Cohen. So there are some religious people that feed the animals and they feel we're like giving a gift to the Cohen, right? Because he's the owner. So if it's Choshen Mishpat, that's my obligation. So this is a big discussion. Rashi explained to us in Tractate Avodah Zarah, page 15a. He said, Truma you can give to whoever you wish to. But here it's like you have a silent agreement or some type of agreement. It's like, we call it in Ivrit, Havana Ilemet. You have sometimes a tenant and landlord that they have certain understanding over certain things that even they wasn't expressed in writing. Certain
agreements.
What?
Verbal agreements.
Sometimes verbal understanding, verbal agreement, etc. Especially if it's they live together for a long time.
Right.
So it's a discussion how far you go with that, especially if something was stolen or something that lost, etc. You treat it as shomer chinam or shomer sachar. Tosfot elaborate on that. Anyway, Rashi challenged in Tosfot, do you do it ma'achal adam or be'ema? How you treat it? So he said, Truma, you have to, you can give it to an animal. But basically you treat it, in that sense, the animal food as a regular food. ותסברה, נהי נמי למחייב בגניבה ועבדה, בו נסע בכחשה, ונפחד דמי ימי מחייב. הלא דמיה אלא לסייפה, we go by the last clause of the משנה. ישראל ששם פרה מכהן, לא יאכילה קרשיני תרומה, אבל כהן ששם פרה מישראל, יאכילן קרשיני תרומה. So at this point, כרגע בעלים גמורים, now they are full owners. Tosfot said that is the issue of rebit, issue of interest. Tiv Rabba ורב יוסף בשילהי פירקי דרב נחמן. There is a book by Yavetz. He asked the question, what is Beshilhei? Beshilhei is the name of a place. So he said in those days they are standing while they hear the lecture and they display equanimity. So he said that's V'yatvei v'ka'amrei, and then they sit and they said, it's like Bimshoch ha'yovel lama ya'alu ba'ar. So they, anyway, Tanya כבדי דרב יהודה ותנא כבדי דרב ימי. תנא כבדי דרב ימי עבדי צאן ברזל יוצאים בשן בעין לאיש אבל לא לאישה. Why? Because it's her and not his. תנא כבדי דרב יהודה מכנסת שום לבעלה, אם רצה הבעל למכור לא ימכור. So obviously it's שבח בית אביה, that's the way Rashi said, ולא עוד אלא אפילו הכניס לה שום מי שלא ירצה, אם רצה הבעל למכור לא ימכור, מכרו שניהם, if both, לפרנסה. זה היה מעשה לפני רבן שמעון גמליאל ואמר, הבעל מוציא מיד הלקוחות. אמר רב נחמן לחק רב יהודה, let's go by her. אמר לרב נחמן תנא כבתי דרב ימי, so say אבל גם תנא כבתי דרב ימי, מסתבר תנא דרב יהודה משום שבח בית אביה. So basically you go by her. So for sure there is much more to discuss, we don't have time. האיתתא דאליה לגברא איתתלה, דמילתא דכתובתא. So she have a very expensive or emotional cloth that it's part of the ketubah, that's nichse tzon barzel. Shchiv, the husband passed. Shaklu hayatmeu prasua mitna. How do you like that? The children of the deceased, what did they do? They took that clothing that she brought and they made it as part of the, how do you call, shroud?
Shroud, yeah.
Shroud. Amar Rava kanyana minta. So the dead acquired this. Right. And therefore you cannot derive any benefit from that. You can get cash, but you cannot touch it. It's a famous Gemarrah Shamayim, Sanhedrin 47. Very painful, but that's the way it is. אמר לעינני ברד רב יוסף ברד רבא לרב כהנא ואמר רב נחמן הלכה כרב יהודה. So if that's the case, a person cannot prohibit something that's not his. So even they took it for shroud, but it's not there. אמר למימון רב יהודה דמחוסר גוביינה וכיוון דמחוסר גוביינה ברשותי קאי. רבא לתעמד אמר רבא, הקדש, חמץ, page 67, ושחרור and emancipation, מפקיעים מידי שיעבוד. So therefore the הקדש חל, and you have the איסור הנאות, תכריכי המת, it's like הפקר. אמר רב יהודה, הכניסה לו שני כלים ב1,000 זוז ושפכו ועמדו על 2,000, now it's worth more, אחד נוטלתו בכתובתה, ואחד נוטל דמים, ונוטלתו בני שבח בית אביה, so she is the big winner. So even the husband has to give more ונכסון צאן ברזל, but she can take that vessel for שבח בית אביה. Meaning according to that value. מה כמשמע? שבח בית אביה דידי הווה. So it means that vessel which represent the prestige of her father's house are hers to retain. So they said, אמר רב יהודה חד הזימנה. We remember what Rav Yehuda said. That הדיני מה? So why he said again, הכניסה לו שני כלים, מהו דתימה למילי, איך דתימה למשקל בכתובתה? You may think that that's applied to those vessels coming to her in a collection of her ketubah. אבל מיתן דמי ומשקל? לא. Maybe if it's come to cash, so or she can redeem when the Baal or husband or the inheritor or her money, Kamash Melan. So Rabbi Yehuda come and teach us in the rule of two vessels that the ruling that allows the wife to retain her tzon barzel properties after the marriage apply even in such a case.
ויחם לשולוים מלאכי השולוים מלאכי